Good afternoon and welcome to Freedom Deals Live for today. So for those that are new, what do we do in Freedom Deals Live? We go through real deals, some of which are active deals that I'm actually doing due diligence on now and considering purchasing. They may be deals that I've passed on already. They may be deals that I'm currently doing, or they may be people that I'm working with at the moment who are working through those deals at the moment. And the whole idea of Freedom Deals Live is that you get to see and you can look over my shoulder as I actually do the initial due diligence on these deals. Now, would I actually purchase a deal based on just what I do in these sessions? Typically, no. Typically, this is the first run of due diligence across a site. So we're looking for what are the big red flags, what are the risks that I see, what are the opportunities that I see. We run the numbers typically. We look at the servicing typically. But normally, there will be more questions to be answered afterwards. But what you will notice is that when we do this, that we do cull most of the sites. And that's it, welcome to development. Most of the sites that you look at will either be unworkable in terms of the functionality of the site. It may not be right for your strategy. It may not be serviceable, or typically cuts out most is the pricing is just not appropriate. It's not feasible based on the purchase price that the seller is asking. So one of the big, obstacles that people need to get over when they first get started is learning how to cull lots of deals quickly, because you need to be able to screen out a high volume of deals so that you can spend your time cautiously and focus in on the ones that are actually worth spending the time on. So first of all, I just want to do a quick tech check. Can I get a comment saying, yes, you can hear me, yes, you can see me, just to make sure that we've got our tech up and running, because we have had those troubles in the past. So pop in the comments. There typically is a slight delay in the comments, so if it does look like I'm taking a while to respond, it can be one, because the comments actually do take a while to publish. Thanks, Roland. And two, I may be mid-sentence and I may not see it as the appropriate time to respond just yet. So what we're looking at now is a 1 and 2, 3 that is DA approved. So what we're looking at here is a zoomed in version of the approved plan. So you can see it is a corner block. You can see that we've got our street frontage right here wrapping around. We've got a 449 square meter proposed lot 1. We've got a 410 square meter proposed lot 2 and a 410 proposed lot 3 with an existing dwelling, which this black dotted line here is its current location. And the blue line is its intended future location by shifting the house. Pardon me. Now, for those of you that have been doing this with me for a while, first of all, what have you learned from the previous times where we've gone through these sorts of deals about shifting houses? Anything that comes up for you in terms of costs, complexity, advantages, disadvantages, just pop it in the comments for me while I continue on. Let's just see what actually comes up for you from our previous conversations around shifting houses and when and where it's a good thing to do and when and where it's a thing that you want to avoid. So as I said, DA approved already. Now, does DA approved mean that it's a done deal and it's a good thing to move forward? Well, not necessarily. Number one, the way that they've done a DA doesn't necessarily mean that's the best way to do it. So consider yourselves as just starting out developers. There is a possibility that when you do your first project, that the way you design it may not actually be the best way to do it, because ultimately you're still building the skill set, you're still learning. And so that is quite a common thing in the marketplace, where people will go and put a DA on a site. And if they're not particularly experienced, they may just think, oh, well, as long as I've got a DA, then that's going to add the value and I'll be able to sell it for more, et cetera, et cetera. Not true, because the type of DA that you put on it ultimately spelling out exactly what the person needs to do to purchase. So if your design is lacking, then you're selling that lacking design, or you're selling them a problem that they need to solve. They may need to go back into counsel, which is time, which is money, holding costs, consultancy costs, risk is can they get the outcome that they need, all of those sorts of things. So if you're going to put a DA on a site to sell it, you want to make damn sure that the DA is a good DA. And I've seen this many times in the past where people are like, oh, look, I've got this 20 lot subdivision. Mind you, they've never done a subdivision before in their life. I've got this 20 lot subdivision. I've put a DA on it and now I want X for it. And then you look at the DA and you're like, well, no chance, because I'm going to have to redo that entire DA because ultimately you've done a terrible job. You've ticked the box, but the whole thing needs to be reworked. So that's just something to have in the back of your mind. So Roland, best to keep the house unless it's too expensive to make it habitable. Shifting a house is expensive though. Correct. Expensive, troublesome. It's always a thing of, what are you going to come across? What further renovations are going to be needed because you've shifted the house? What new things you're going to uncover? And it depends on the type of house too. Old Queenslanders are notorious for just being sort of like, break out another 1,000 sort of a situation where you never know what it's going to cost really until you get into it. And it typically ends up costing a lot more than you expect. But with shifting houses, the thing where people mostly make, I guess, a judgmental error or there's a misunderstanding. There's a few that come to mind in this sort of a thing, and you'll hear the numbers thrown around going, it costs 30 grand to move a house. So, well, that's part of the truth. It might cost you 30 grand for the house removal company, as in the guys that turn up, stick it on a trailer and shift it. I haven't got a quote from them recently. It's probably more these days, but let's even say that it was 30,000 for that company. That's only part of the job. So then there's all the flow-on costs, because when you lift a house out of the ground and shift it over here, what about the plumbing? What about the electricity? What about the drainage? Everything else has to shift too. So everything that was there is now redundant, and you either need to make good or make new or redesign. And the flow-on effects tend to go on quite a while. The last I heard of someone doing it, their end-up cost was about 120,000. I would say it's much higher than that these days because they managed that themselves. They also didn't do anything particularly grandiose downstairs. They literally just battened it in. I don't think they even concreted in downstairs. So that just gives you an idea of it's not the actual shift of the house that is necessarily the expensive part. It's all of the flow-on costs that happen after that. So that then introduces the next question, which is, okay, if it's going to cost me, let's say 150,000 to shift the house from point 1 to point 2, well, is that worth doing? How much value is there actually in the house? Because if the house is only worth 150 grand, well, it's really just cost time, frustration, and risk. So you're better off just probably bulldozing it. So there's all of these things you need to consider when shifting a house. I definitely wouldn't encourage you to do your first project involving shifting a house. It just adds way more complexity than you need in your first deal. Okay, so in this one here though, it is DA approved, and it's DA approved with shifting the house. So let's have a look. What do you think about the design, and what possibilities do you see? Actually, before we do that, I'm planting that seed. What possibilities do you see in this? Is this the best way for this 1 into 3 to be designed? Or is there a better way for this 1 into 3 to be designed? Have a look, start thinking about it. We're going to move on to the services and have a look what's there as well. But just have that seed planted, and any ideas that come to mind, pop it in the comments, pardon me, and we'll come back to it. Okay, so let's have a look at servicing. No, that's not wanting to publish. We'll come back to that one. Okay, so sewer and water. Oh, it seems like we have a bit of a universal thing going on here. Won't even let me zoom. Anyway, you can see what we need. So we've got our block here. We've got water here with the existing connection here. And we've got sewer coming through here with an existing property connection there. Now, these sorts of ones I don't love, in that the dial before you dig literally shows the sewer main on the boundary. Well, it can't actually be on the boundary. It's either in our land or it's not in our land. It's either partially in our land or it's not at all in our land. So yeah, that's not ideal. Now, I'm going to make the assumption that given that this is DA approved, that they have had that pipe located, that they know the actual server, they actually know the location of it, and that we have access to it, because in the approved design, they've got the sewer main being extended up here. So for our purposes today, we're going to assume that we have access to that sewer. But if this wasn't a DA approved site, that is definitely one of the first things that you would need to have a look at and actually see, is that sewer, and specifically the sewer main, is the sewer main in our property? Or Is it just that our property connection is in our property, but the main is actually next door, and now we need permission from the neighbour? So that's an important point on two fronts. One, can we get access? So can it be done? Two, from a cost aspect, because if it was in the neighbours and we then needed to create a new main extension into ours and down here, you're also talking the addition of a manhole as well, and yeah, not cheap. So that is I guess a key distinction for when you're first looking at sites. Now, again, this one's DA approved. We've actually got the cost estimates, so we can move forward with that, but that's just a learning for you. But bottom line, water and sewer on this actually look pretty good. We've got the water around the frontage, remembering the water is pressurized, so we don't care whether it's at the low point or the high point. And the sewer is currently here. Well, the site has to be sort of draining to that point, doesn't it? Otherwise, the existing sewer wouldn't work. So extending the sewer along here, it's also DA approved. They would have had to prove that in the DA process that is a workable solution. So water and sewer do not appear to be an issue for the site. Let's have a look at Energex. Okay, Energex, we've got power under the road. Okay, so we're all good with Energex. We've already looked at that. Now let's see if NBN will load this time for us. No. Okay, well, spoiler alert, the NBN works. I don't know why that file's not loading at the moment. Okay, so let's come back to the subdivision plan. Just show us everything we need there. So Roland says, I think you could redo the boundaries without moving the house. Odd-shaped blocks. Good idea. Okay, so what Roland is talking about there is, as much as we do prefer a nice rational rectangular block, it's not the only type of block that exists. And if you actually have a look at your neighborhood, you'll notice all of a sudden how common irregular shaped blocks are. Now, what is easier to sell and what is going to get the premium? Yes, a nice regular shaped block is going to get the premium. But if the block is big enough, it's a lot more forgiving on the shape. So these are actually reasonable sized blocks, 400 square meters plus. They're also quite wide. This particular plan doesn't show you the dimensions, but I think this one's about 12 and a half from memory, or wider, might even be 14, and same with this one here. So they're quite wide. Now, what potentially could be done here instead of this situation here is bringing this boundary potentially a bit further this way, and, dotted line here is your existing house. So maybe that it starts here, maybe bring it a bit further this way, comes in at an angle, goes around, and then comes out at an angle. Now, why does it have to go out at an angle? Because in this area, it's a minimum 400 square meter blocks. Council may be open to considering just the average of the three, given that there is a nice fat frontage. That is a possibility. But even if it's not, you could create a code accessible block here by having big enough frontage and having the minimum lot size solved by doing an irregular shape like that. Now, do we set out for aiming for that? No. But is that going to, so if we're going to say that moving this house is going to cost 150 grand, is doing this going to lose 150,000 in value from the block? No, it's not. Especially in a market like this where land is so sought after and so tight in supply, you may not even see a difference in the pricing, certainly not a large one. But so if this was me starting from scratch with this and I was wanting to retain this house, I would be looking at that possibility of doing an irregular boundary to save having to shift the house and to save having to demolish the house. Because in my view, in this suburb and also with the quality of the house, spending 150,000 plus to keep the house by shifting it, I don't think is worthwhile. And the numbers reflect that as well. So if it could be done, and in this case here, we'd have to do an amendment to the DA because it's already DA approved. But if we could do an amendment to the DA to shift that boundary so that it now wraps around the house and the house can stay where it is, in my view, that is a much better outcome. Keep in mind too, when you look at a plan like that, it looks very unusual. When you drive down the street, typically you cannot even notice because all you see from the front is the front of a house. And you'd be surprised at how many blocks actually fan out to the fan out to the street. So it's not actually that visible when it comes to driving down the street and noticing it. So I believe that is a better outcome, but let's have a look. Questions so far? Oh my goodness. Really not having much luck with the files. All right, bear with me, guys. I'm just going to stop sharing this screen for a second while I try and solve this file issue. I have a solution. Bear with me. Okay. All right, here we go. Let's try that again. All right. Should see an Excel spreadsheet. Let me know if you can or if you cannot, but you should see an Excel spreadsheet. Now, I will say for those of you that have been watching this Freedom Deals Live for a while now, you'll notice that I've used in the past, there's two different Excel spreadsheets that I use for my feasibilities. This one I've only shown you on the rare occasion because it's typically what I use for larger projects. So I have one template which I use basically for any sites that don't require the construction of a road. And then I have this one here, which is for everything above that. Now, one of my team members has done the initial feasibility on this and he's more comfortable with this spreadsheet. So he's used this one. So apologies, it's not going to do you any harm seeing me operate with this one though. Okay, so we won't buckle down too much into the dates here, but in a nutshell, 16 months is being allowed for the project. Why shorter than usual? It's already DA approved. Now, purchase price they are asking for on this one is 1.3 million. 3-lot subdivision. It's already DA approved, so we don't have any professionals prior to DA. And we've allowed another 15,000 for professionals post DA. Now, services and earthworks, we've actually had, ignore those, that's old. We've actually had estimates come in. And so we've got driveways, stormwater, sewerage, water, footpath, retaining, that's an easy one, and fill. So you can see here how quickly fill and retaining can add up and make a substantial difference. So this is where understanding the drainage of your site is really important. So ultimately we've got 182 grand of estimated cost for actually doing, this is just the physical element of the site, not including electrical. So electrical, the assumption is another 24. So that's for design and for construction. And then we've got a 10% contingency on the construction cost. So infrastructure charges, we're going to have two new lots. So 2 lots of infrastructure charges. And then we've got some nominal amounts here basically for random costs, street landscapes, et cetera, et cetera. Some holding costs, ownership costs, not including any project management or development management in this one. And 4.5% for purchasing costs. Now, I won't spend too much time on the acquisitions model here because I don't want to overcomplicate things here. But ultimately with this one here, there's a question as to how you would finance this based on the house. If the house is habitable, you can probably get an investment loan on it, which is going to be your cheapest option. If the house is not habitable, you're not going to get an investment loan on it, and it's going to have to be either a land facility or a land banking facility or some sort of commercial facility. So I believe we could probably get an investment loan on this one, but I haven't actually walked through the house myself at this point. But I have heard that it's in not the best condition. So it depends. And it also depends on your valuer. I've had valuers put a note on properties saying they're not habitable for some pretty interesting reasons. And then others that overlook all sorts of stuff. So, it's a bit of I think most of you have heard the story where I actually renovated a property to demolish it. I renovated it so that it was ticked as habitable, and then demolished it about 3 weeks later. Obviously, it wasn't a renovation for beauty. It was renovating to do the bare minimum to tick the box of being habitable to get the finance. So yeah, part of the game. So in this case here, I've allowed a 70% LVR on purchase, and I've gone with an 11% rate. Why? Because of the possibility of that house not being habitable. If it is habitable, different story. It's not going to make or break the feasibility though. So as an example, if it's a 7% interest rate, it saves us $10,000 on interest. Is that making or breaking the feasibility? If it is, the feasibility is too tight. And then when we come to the construction element, I've allowed for, again, a higher interest rate just based on the type of project. And you could go to someone like Westpac or ANZ or that sort of thing. For these smaller projects, they tend to be quite painful. They're quite good with the bigger projects when your debt level's higher, but when you have a smaller debt level, you go into a different team, and it can be, it's still probably a rate of 7%, but it's a lot of stuffing around in my experience. So sometimes, I'm not saying that's what I would choose, but sometimes it's just faster and easier and better off just steamrolling through with another finance facility that may be more expensive when you look at it in the feasibility. But when you factor in the additional time of having to wait for the other finance facility, if you do, then the two can actually balance each other out, and speed is preferable. So I've gone 60%, again at 11%. Don't get too caught up on that. Again, it's only going to save us maybe 10, 15 grand if we switch to the other. So let's have a look. Now here I've worked on 600 for each of the vacant blocks, and I've worked on 800 for the block with the house. This is assuming we do not shift the house. So this is actually the best version of the feasibility, because if we factor in shifting the house, it gets worse. So here we're going 600,000 per vacant block and 800,000 for the block with the house on it. I'm just putting a nominal value of 200,000 on a house, because typically these days, if you can do anything with it, that's about what it's worth. Again, area dependent. First run FISO, not doing buying decisions based on this. I've allowed $6 grand for marketing, 2.5% for commissions, 500 for legals on the sales. It's probably a bit light these days. GST, and voila, a whopping $25,000 profit if we do it this way. Not very sexy. All right, so with this spreadsheet here, I can put in there what my minimum margin is that I need, and it'll tell me what I need to buy it for if that's what I need to hit. And this is the number here. So they're wanting 1.3 to make a 20% ROI on the subdivision. I need to make $1 million. Now, are there multiple things? Sorry, I need to buy for $1 million. Are there other things we could do here? Yeah, okay, we can factor in a renovation budget and adding some additional value by renovating the house and all those sorts of things. But none of that is going to make up the difference of needing to buy it for $1 million versus them wanting 1.3. So unless they're willing to consider a very serious reduction in their in their price, it's not worth entertaining any of that other stuff. Or I shouldn't say entertaining it, it's not worth investing a lot of time in those potential strategies. And this is what I was touching on at the start, is you just want to cull the rubbish as fast as possible. Right strategy, right property, right vendor, and an edge. Okay, if we've got a vendor who's wanting 1.3 and all we can see value at is 1, it's not the right vendor. Or it may not be the right strategy for the block, but master your strategy. Don't go looking for the right strategy for the block. Master a strategy and look at everything through the filter of that strategy. That's how you're actually going to find your first deal. If you're trying to find different strategies to meet every project, every property, you cannot become an expert in every single strategy. And you can't be an expert in every single property. But you can become an expert in one strategy and then view every property through the lens of that strategy and just get better and better and better at that strategy. Once you've mastered one, Sure, add a second. But here's what most people look like. They're looking in 10, 15 plus suburbs. So they're not a master of any suburb. They are looking at 3 to 5 strategies. They're looking at subdivisions. They're looking at renovations. They're looking at townhouses. They're looking at strata titling. So they're not a master of any of the strategies. So they're not a master of their area, and they're not a master of a strategy, and they're competing against professional developers who are masters of their area and are masters of their strategy. You do the math. How's that going to work out for you? Okay. Questions? And while you're thinking of questions, or while you put them in, so we will have one more Freedom Deals Live session next week. That will be the final one for this year. In January, there probably will be none unless I manage to pre-record any before Christmas, because I'll basically be on holidays all of January. So next week will be the last Freedom Deals Live session, most likely until February. I may be running a mastermind next week as a, I guess, a finish off of the year as to where we are in the market, what I'm seeing for 2026, and potentially a bit of goal setting and those sorts of things. Yet to be decided. It depends on my availability next week and what I've got going on. One other thing I wanted to touch on before we break away is a particular article. Yep, you can see that. Okay, so this was published by Cotality this week, I think it was. Housing rebound defies affordability strain as 2025's standout suburbs revealed. So in the context of the 18-year cycle, what does that say to you guys? From what you've heard me talk about the cycle, and maybe what you've read in the books that I've suggested, if you've read them, or other people that are talking about this sort of stuff on social media, what does that say to you? Housing rebound defies affordability strain. And I guess to add to the context, in the last 2 years, constant talk in the media has been pricing can't keep going up because no one can afford it. Right? It's unaffordable. It's unaffordable. No one can afford higher prices, so pricing has to correct. Pricing can't keep going up because no one can afford it. Look, I guess it always depends on what time frame you're talking about. So Roland, we're still heading towards the peak. Yeah. So basically, this is exactly what you would expect at this time, as in we are getting close to the peak. In that it's fueled by debt. There's still a lot of easy debt around, despite certain rules being introduced and possible interest rate rises on the horizon, those sorts of things. But that's all very normal for towards the end of the peak. Typically towards the end of the peak, inflation finds a way to start going up again, which typically means interest rates start going up again. But even with those headwinds, pricing still continues to climb until it doesn't. And then life gets very tough in the market. So I'm just flagging that as that. Have a look at the headlines that are coming around now, but look at it through the lens of the 18-year cycle, as in this is exactly the sort of thing you would expect to see at the moment. Other things as well as resource stocks, typically very strong towards the end of the cycle. Banking stocks, typically very strong towards the end of the cycle. But when you look at like the big house builders in the US, they're all doing horrifically. So all of these things are history repeating in a very, very, very strong way. So 2026, either way, is going to be an interesting year. And yes, if I can schedule in enough time next week, I will do a end of year and sort of set up for 2026 session. I'll keep you posted. It may end up being one or the other, Freedom Deals Live or the Mastermind. But anyway, either way, we'll have a session next week. I'll let you know when it'll be and what it'll be. Thanks, guys. See you.